Qorvex is the brand new Warframe, but in the dev stream leading up to his release, he looked really not that good. And that's also what I said in my dev stream recap. But oh boy was I wrong, because this dude doesn't take any prisoners. So in today's guide, we're gonna find out what's actually up with Qorvex, check out his abilities, his playstyle, and of course, I have builds for you that absolutely cut through Steel Path enemies like a hot knife through butter. Big thank you to all my generous channel members who help me keep the lights on, and let's jump right into it. As always in my build guides, let's first take a look at what Qorvex can even do. His passive skill is called Core Exposure and is really straightforward. What it does is, it gives any weapon that you hold in your hands plus 3 meters of punch through. I really like this. His first ability, and I really hope I pronounced this one right, is called Kairinka Pillar, or as I personally like to call it, a radiation stick. This one is a really nice crowd controlling ability. You can have up to 2 of these sticks on the field at any given time, and they come already with a very nice duration right out of the factory. Now, what these pillars do is, whenever an enemy comes into their range, the enemy is slowed by 35%. Unfortunately, these 35% are fixed and cannot be modified by any mods. And in addition to this slow, those pillars also pulsate out radiation energy in a certain frequency, dealing radiation damage to all the enemies in range and also force proc radiation on them. And just in case you didn't know, let's very quickly talk about radiation again. Whenever an enemy is affected by radiation, they get confused and they start attacking each other. So, the more enemies are affected by radiation, the less damage is gonna come towards you, your teammates, or the mission objective. However, it should be mentioned that just because they are confused and start attacking each other, they still can identify you as a target, meaning you're not completely immune to taking damage. All in all, I still think those radiation sticks are a great ability for crowd control, and as if that's not enough, this is also Qorvex helmet ability, so you can put this on any frame you like. Skill number 2, Containment Wall. This one is very interesting. What it does is, it creates 2 thick walls that are gonna smash together and deal radiation damage to all the enemies hit by it. Also, if the wall hits one of your pillars, this pillar starts spreading out the radiation a bit faster than with the usual frequency. But I personally think this little synergy can safely be ignored. Now, what Containment Wall is really supposed to do is to crowd control the enemies into one line by pushing them together as the walls are closing in. Every enemy hit by those walls permanently gets more vulnerable to your damage, meaning they take a certain percentage of more damage, a bit like a viral proc, but not as strong. Now, I think the whole idea behind Containment Wall was that it's used to push the enemies together in one thin line so that you can benefit from your passive and use a weapon to shoot those enemies standing in line and benefit from your added punch through. But in practice, I think it doesn't work out quite as well, because there are so many environmental objects in the way that are obstructing the enemies, so they never get pushed together really, or they're not in the same room, or the direction in which the wall appears doesn't quite line up the way that you want it to. So at the end of the day, I think it would have been better to just have a crowd control that sums all the enemies up in one blob, like Mag's pole. Qorvex's 3 is called Disometric Guard, and this one is actually very straightforward. Just like Revenant's Mesmer skin, you get a certain number of charges, but instead of Revenant, where those charges take away the damage that you're taking, for Qorvex they're only taking away status effects, granting him basically status immunity. Whenever you kill or assist an enemy affected by radiation, aka with Qorvex pretty much every enemy in the entire room, you get additional charges for this skill, meaning in practice this one is a once switch on skill, and then it's really easy to just keep it up forever. And finally, let's now come to the big thing in his kit, which would be his ultimate, his 4, called Crucible Blast. Now, usually when Warframes have a very expensive, very high damage dealing 4th ability, this kinda turns out to be not all that great when it comes to Steel Path enemies. However, with Qorvex and Crucible Blast, this one is very different. Crucible Blast shoots out a big ray that deals radiation damage, and a ton of it. The first thing that I absolutely want to mention here is, while you're in the casting animation, you're completely invincible. This is a gigantic convenience factor because, let's be honest, when you're playing Steel Path and you're standing still in one spot for multiple seconds, this leaves you incredibly vulnerable and wouldn't be worth the cast if you didn't have any sort of protection while doing so. Now, as for the enemies that are getting hit by this ray, they again take radiation damage and radiation procs, and they also start a chain reaction of radiation explosions that deal more damage the more radiation effects were on the enemy. So what this means is, especially when there are a lot of enemies nearby close together, they're gonna get completely nuked into oblivion simply by this chain reaction of massive explosions. This skill is so strong that it can easily take down level 200 Steel Path enemies and probably even beyond. And quick side note, I would be super happy if you could maybe consider leaving the video a like, really helps the channel out a lot, so cheers for that, mate. But now, let's bring all those nice skills into practice and take a look at his playstyle. Alright, so how do you play Qorvex? To be fair, it's really simple. When the mission starts, you first want to make sure that your 3 is switched on to get your status immunity, and as we already pointed out, killing enemies refreshes this, so you're pretty much set for the rest of the mission. Then you want to make sure that you put your pillars down in a way that most enemies around you are radiated so they're confused, not attacking you. Even though Qorvex has a lot of health and armor, those pillars, confusing the enemies, making sure they're attacking each other and not you, are the main factor for your survivability, especially when it comes to Steel Path. And now that all the enemies are confused around you, what you start to do is using your containment wall to push them nicely together, and then spam your 4th skill to deal tons of damage, making everything explode, spreading even more radiation, and it's just gonna end up as a complete firework of carnage. Great fun to play him, and actually also pretty simple. But alright, let's finally take a look at what you're actually here for, and that would be the builds. In this guide, I prepared 2 builds for you, one that is quite expensive but extremely strong, and the other one is a bit more on the budget side without Arcanes, so that even newer players can reproduce this one. Let's jump into it, starting with the budget approach. First off, in the aura, you can use absolutely whatever you like. I personally chose Physique simply because the polarity was matching and, you know, more health is always good. And generally, what we want to focus on with the build on Qorvex, at least according to my testing, would be a healthy mix of strength and range. Now, since its 4 is extremely strong, 1 Intensify, if you want to keep it budget, should be enough to even be able to deal with Steel Path. If you want to go a bit higher, then Umbral Intensify would also match nicely. Then, since we're going to cast a lot of skills, Flow is an absolute must to make sure we always have enough energy, and Equilibrium to make sure that the energy income is also up to speed. To get the range that we need both for his pillars and also for his walls, I went for Stretch and Augur Reach, which brings us up to a nice 175%. That is definitely enough. And when it comes to survival, since we're invincible during the cast animation of our 4, which is probably the part where we would be usually most vulnerable, it's actually quite easy. I went for a full health tanking approach, and on the budget variant, this means Vitality, Steel Fiber, and that's basically it. For the last mod slot, I personally went for Streamline simply to be able to spam my skills even more, but if you find you have enough energy with Flow and Equilibrium, then you could also switch this out for maybe Adaptation to have a bit more survivability, or whatever you like. This is more of a flex slot. This build is really cheap to reproduce, and everybody who has enough resources to even make a full Warframe build should be able to get this one. By the way, a quick secret tip for survivability in this budget build is, if your health goes down too fast and you need to heal, then I suggest bringing a melee into the mission with the Lifestrike mod to be able to self-heal you with a simple heavy attack. Or, alternatively, bring the Furious as your secondary weapon with the mod Winds of Purity. You could also, if you have it, use an Incarnon adapter on this one to deal out even more damage. Especially for caster-type frames like Qorvex, having a secondary or melee weapon to do the healing for you is really helpful and convenient. But we can of course crank that up to 11 like crazy. Let's check out the pro build. First off, in this one, I replaced his second ability with Chorus Ensnare simply because I think this is a better grouping ability that harmonizes well with his 4th skill. In the aura, I again went for Physique, but you can use whatever you like. Qorvex is not an aura-depending frame, and in this build, I also went for a healthy mix between strength and range. First off, for the strength, I went for Transient Fortitude and Umbral Intensify to get that up to a massive 199%, which is really a lot for this frame. Then for the range, Stretch and Augur Reach, just like in the cheap build, but also I went for the Exilus mod Cunning Drift to squeeze out that extra little bit of range on top. Prime Flow for more maximum energy, and to make sure that the energy income is also stable, I'm not going to go for Equilibrium in this one, but of course Arcane Energize. In case you don't have Arcane Energize, no problem, you can still reproduce this build, you just maybe need to replace Korra's Ensnare in the Helmet slot with something that gives you energy. As for survivability, also here we went for Vitality and Steel Fiber, but if you like it really expensive, you could use an Umbra Forma and go for Umbral Vitality and Umbral Fiber on top of Umbral Intensify to really min-max those numbers to the brim. And to make sure that all the incoming fire is not overwhelming you, I went for Arcane Grace to get that extra bit of heal, but I personally think this is more of a flex slot in the Arcanes and you could go for something else. A good alternative might be Mold Augmented to get more ability strength to deal even crazier amounts of damage. Also, if you find this build helpful, you might want to think about leaving the channel a sub so you don't miss out on future build guides. Welcome to the crew. But, of course, no Warframe build would be complete without talking about Archon shards, so let's quickly do that right now. First off, I personally think Qorvex doesn't need any Archon shards to be good and to fully unleash his power. However, if you want to invest shards into him, then here are some suggestions. Of course, if you like more health, more shields, more maximum energy, or more armor, then feel free to use as many blue shards as you like. I personally think though, this is not that much of a problem, rather go for yellow shards that give you a bit more casting speed, especially with his second and first ability, this comes in handy. But, and this is the big but, with this Whispers in the Wall update, we also got 3 brand new colors of Archon shards, about which I'm also going to make a video, don't miss out on that. And one of these, the orange one, is absolutely tailor-made for Qorvex because it gives you the option to get plus 10% ability damage to enemies affected by radiation. Since you're going to dish out tons of this element, this is of course going to be a great option. Now, the build and the Archon shards might all be nice and well, but there is one last key element to make this whole setup actually work, and that would be our companion. Since Qorvex is a caster-type frame and doesn't really want or need to use weapons, the standard Sisters of Powos Hound or Diriga combos that I usually recommend in my videos don't really apply here. Instead, the #1 companion that I would recommend would be none other than the Panzer Valpaphyla. As we all know, with its skill Viral Quills, the Panzer Valpaphyla is excellent at spreading viral all across the room, affecting every enemy so you deal tons more damage to them. Add to that Qorvex himself has high health and high armor, so you can use the Link Health and Link Armor mods on the Valpaphyla to make sure that your little Foxy is basically unkillable. Then, especially with the cheap build which uses Equilibrium for your energy sustain, go for Synth Deconstruct so the enemies drop way more health orbs that in turn for you mean more energy. Another great option would be Mystic Bond, which makes that whenever your companion has successfully done 5 skills, you get a Warframe ability cast for free, which, especially for Qorvex, who needs to spam his 100 energy force skill a lot, is great energy saving potential. Now, if all that sounds super duper nice for you and you want to get your greedy little fingers on Qorvex yourself, then you might be wondering, where do I get him from? And that's actually quite straightforward. To get the main blueprint, you need to finish the brand new Whispers in the Wall quest, and the component blueprint will then be obtained from the new syndicate that opens up after you finish this quest. Just a quick info on the side, in order to be able to even access this quest, you need to have finished the new war, so if you haven't yet, then this might be a great incentive to finally get going on this. If you now want a quick overview of everything else that this new update brought to the table, then don't miss out on this video right here. Another massive thank you also to Akimbo Fade, Niels V, Lamies, Demon Lord Zell, Bland Waffle, Demon Emperor, Emperor Prime, and all other generous channel members for your continuous support. We see each other hopefully in the next one, and until then, as always, good loot!